And now, moving on to our speaker, who is none else than Márton Ekler from Shapr3D. Márton has been leading engineering teams for 5 years now, with more than a decade of engineering background before. He worked for tech companies such as Prezi or Unity before joining Shapr3D as a senior engineering manager. The title of his speech will be Developing the Visualization Tool in Shapr3D and Changing the 3D Modeling Workflow for Good. Let's welcome Márton with a huge round of applause. Márton, the stage is yours.
Hello everyone. Thank you for coming to this talk. My name is Márton Ekler, and I'm an engineering manager at Shapr3D. And I also happen to be the product manager of the visualization feature I'm about to talk about today. So let's begin. During this talk, I'm going to give you a brief introduction about the visualization feature and explain why we have built this feature. Then I'm going to talk about two major aspects of the delivery. First, how we build the team, and second is how we shaped our processes to become more efficient in delivering the feature. As our time is pretty limited today, I'm not going to talk about any deeper engineering aspects or deeper technology aspects, just scratching the surface in several areas. Actually, this topic could fill another hour easily, so maybe that could be a topic for another talk. So let's begin. First, I would like to introduce Shapr3D to you. Actually, how many of you know Shapr3D? Please raise your hands. Okay, not bad. We could do it a little bit better. So luckily, we have the Shapr3D booth just behind you. So if you get excited about the product after this talk, feel free to just go there and try it. It's great. So Shapr3D is an innovative 3D CAD tool, a modeling tool for industrial designers, engineers, product managers, manufacturers, and other design professionals. We are on a mission for reinventing the CAD industry that got stuck in the past. We are building a 3D modeling app that works for the users instead of holding them back. So let's start with a case study about the visualization feature and see how we decided on what to build and how to build. Let's take a look at how Shapr3D was before the visualization feature. This is the modeling space view of Shapr3D. You can see that this is a very typical CAD-looking software, which has very sleek and easy looking, but this is very good for the modeling purposes. So it has a highly intuitive user interface, which is very handy to manipulate and change your models. However, there is one problem with it. If you want to present your ideas to a customer or any similar situation, that's a very, very different perspective you have to do. You want to present your ideas in a more realistic way. For this, our users have been traditionally relying on third-party tools to create such images, but this causes one problem. There is no interoperability between Shapr3D and their third-party softwares, eventually breaking their workflow. As a result, this will lead to slower communication and slower decision-making process, something which is always costing you money. So let's see how we could find a solution for this. One additional aspect to add is that materials have been one of the top 5 most wanted features based on our churn surveys. So there are two options what we can consider for a solution. The first one is focusing on productivity. The other one is focusing on image quality. Let's take a look at what they mean. Focusing on productivity can aim for semi-realistic image creation. That's just from the fact that today's hardware is not capable of ultra-photorealistic quality. Also, this would connect to somewhere in the middle of the design process because you can actively integrate into your design workflow, and thus would result in a very familiar Shapr3D editing experience with an instant feedback. On the other hand, you can go for photorealistic image quality. That has its benefits. It's suitable for the later stages of the project lifecycle, but the workflow wouldn't really fit so well in the existing Shapr ecosystem. It would feel a little bit alien. So actually, both are very viable ways to go, and both are good. It just really matters on what kind of strategy you're making when creating this product. So let's just make a quick poll. If you would be the product managers of Shapr, which one would you pick? Hands up if you would pick the solution A. Okay, who would pick solution B? Okay, so it's a mix. Obviously, both are good, so it really depends on what and how you want to ship to your users. We ultimately went for solution A, so we decided to build an interactive solution for adding materials and textures to your models, and then rendering in a realistic way to extend the existing creation workflow. And well, naming is always hard, so after several iterations, we just ended up calling it visualization. And it's really just the beginning of a longer journey. We are planning to make it a platform inside Shapr3D. You can see a few images of the result. As you can see, we have several plastic, metal, wood, and other materials which are not showcased in these images. And on the right side, you can see how the user interface looks like with having a selection for different kinds of materials and different environments around the objects. Okay, so let's see how we build this team. Well, I guess most of you are familiar working in a team. I guess most of you are working in a team, so it's a very important aspect of your daily routine and how you solve issues. So let's take a look how we did it. We had very tough expectations for this project. We had to create a feature that will be a fundamental addition to our workflow. We had to make it very easy to use, optimizing for user engagement and user retention. That's very key for a product. We had to ship it with a lot of assets and content, for example, different materials. And we had to make it multi-platform. Shapr3D is a multi-platform CAD software, so it's an important part of the business. And we had an ultra-ambitious 6 months delivery deadline with the expectation that we can do incremental feature updates later on. Let's see how reality was. There was a fundamental mismatch in the team setup because our team was purely technical team with 2 engineers and myself, which had absolutely no experience in feature development. We have been really working on the fundamental parts of the application, of the rendering side. We had no product manager, and we had no cross-functional team. And we had no dedicated QA personnel. Instead, we have been doing very, very meticulous code reviews and relying on test automation. But we had a very good experience in delivering very high-quality multi-platform code. And why? Because the rendering part was a fundamental part of Shapr3D. If that's broken, everything is broken. So let's take a look what kind of things we had to do. First of all, we had to finalize the project scope, scaling up the team for that, then building and delivering the feature. All of this had to be at the same time due to the very, very strict time constraints. So achieving these super ambitious goals required very, very highly pragmatic thinking. So in many cases, we really had to think outside of the box, how we can deliver on with such requirements. We had to rethink several aspects of our production pipeline. So first of all, how to scale up a team, then how to operate as a team, and then how to operate on a cross-team level. To achieve this feature, we had to deal with several teams inside the company. It's not just one team project. And the tool we had was we can bend all the existing rules. We can change all the existing processes. We can do whatever we want, just make it happen. So one of the examples I would like to bring as a good tool, what you can consider doing in your projects as well, is having shared roles. In many of the projects and many of the teams, you may not have the required capabilities or domain knowledge what you need to deliver a feature that might not be present in the team. So for us, this was the case for a product manager role. A product manager is a very important role because that person has a very fundamental insight and the direction setting for the whole project. In Shapr, we had several PMs, but they have been working on multiple projects in multiple teams, and they really didn't have the rendering expertise. Also, in such short time frame, like 6 months, it is impossible to hire someone and have a good impact in a team. So the conclusion what we were making is maybe the engineering manager, that was myself, could take on the product manager role, because that would give an extra focus and an accelerated decision making to the team. That was a completely new role for me. I've never been a product manager before, but I had the right domain knowledge. I just had to learn and grow myself to be a product manager. I'm still doing that. A second aspect you can consider is deciding between internal and external hiring, because for the feature you might want to deliver, your talent might be already in the company. So just look inside the company, but also keep an eye on the market. In our case, this was really, really a mix, how we scale the team. We had several people who had very, very good expertise in building Shapr3D. They have been with the company since the very beginning. They have been one of the oldest employees of the company. But rendering has been one of the areas where we really fell behind on capacity. So we moved engineers internally to the team, but we also had to hire several rendering engineers in the team. And also, in order to deliver such amount of content to the feature, you need to have some sort of technical artist who can create that content for you. And you need to think about how to give them work after this feature has been done. So actually, we ended up hiring them as contractors. So we can very finely tune how much they're working for us and how much input we have from them, depending on our needs. So to summarize, internal transition of talent can be a very great help to help bridging the knowledge gaps in the team, but also you cannot avoid the external hiring. A third tool, a third very, very important and great tool is mentoring within the team. So in Shapr3D, we put a lot of effort and a lot of importance on the mentoring. Every team does some sort of mentoring within the team. And of course, we are having company-wide training programs. But mentoring only works well if the mentor and the mentee can spend meaningful time together. So you need to make room for that. If you do a rapid hiring, such what we did internal for this project, you will consume a lot of mentoring capacity. For this, we have one rule in Shapr that every mentor in the company can have one mentee to be mindful of everyone's time and everyone's capacity. But that brought one question, because we actually hired 3 people in the team. So how to solve their mentoring? Actually, one of them has been a very junior hire. So what we did finally is having the third person on board in a different team. It was a developer experience team who are responsible for the CI system in the company. So one great impact was that this person actually gained a lot of other knowledge, what we have utilized later on in the project lifecycle. So let me summarize how the team evolved over time. This was the original setup, 2 engineers and an engineering manager. And ultimately, we ended up having 2 teams. One was the kernel team, which was responsible for the very low-level parts of the app side integration, and the other one was the upscaled cross-functional rendering team. From the engineering side, we grew from 2 into 9 engineers, and myself being as an EM and PM role mixed. And we grew into a cross-functional team by having a product designer, QA, user researcher, data scientist, and a CAD expert in the team for supporting this feature. And as I mentioned, we had the 2 contractors who are delivering content for the project. So let me talk briefly about what is the true power of a cross-functional team. I've been talking about having shared responsibility is a great thing because it accelerates decision making, but at the same time, as you look back on the org chart, you see that there is a lot of direct reporting that happened for the engineering manager. So I really became a bottleneck in the decision-making process. So it has a upside, but it also had a downside. So let's see how we can solve this. We really relied on some core strengths of our culture to resolve this. One of them is collaboration. So we build a highly collaborative, cross-functional team where, first of all, you need to understand that in Shapr3D, a product manager is responsible for the project, but he or she is not the lead of the team members. So product manager is a facilitator, he's a visionary, but he doesn't have the direct reports within the team. Therefore, all the cross-functional team members are highly autonomous, and the expectation for them is to become really proactive. So how did we share responsibilities building on this? First one is ownership. It's very important that how you scale up your team, you scale up also the ownership, because that will help you scale the throughput of the team. So we had several team members stepping up. For example, the 2 technical artists who have been contractors, they have been managed by the product designer and one of our senior engineers. So we had the product side representation and the engineering side representation in how to work together with the 2 people. Then the individual smaller components in the project had individual owners, so had the absolutely great overview from the engineering side. Thus, having more ownership actually helped accelerating them in their own personal growth. And personal growth is something what we consider very important in the company. Also, we have the culture of a very high-performing environment. And one of the benefits from this was we really had the most experienced employees in the project due to an internal hire. So we were able to do a very, very high throughput for the project. Okay, so that's about the team, but a team is nothing without the right processes. And I think since most of you have been working in teams, understanding and having great processes is very, very important. Bad processes can really limit your throughput and your productivity, but good processes can really shape and accelerate. So, when it comes to deadlines and scoping, there is one inherent consequence. All the complex projects will impose a great scheduling risk. Why? Because there are so many things what you don't know when creating this project. So, what can we sacrifice? Is it maybe a feature set for the feature, or a platform support, or the quality? All these have been very essential parts of our initial requirements for the project. In order to decide on this, we had one single key driving force. How are we going to maximize the user value in the shortest time frame to deliver a high value and good looking feature? So, let's give some examples. Initially, We decided on having a macOS and iPad support for the feature because that was the biggest part of our user base. And then we added the material support and basic environment support, and we focused on stability. Why? Because if you release an unstable feature, that's not great value for our users. If you release a project on a different platform which has a small user adoption, that's not a great value. Then, for the second iteration of the feature, we decided to add the Windows support, focus on image quality, and customization. And why did we do this? Because Windows support has the smallest user impact. Image quality is an incremental feature, and customization is something what we can figure out while we are building the feature. And last, what we can see on our current roadmap are some advanced use cases. For example, how to optimize for performance, working on some more advanced environments, and doing more interoperability features. You may think, like, why performance is in this third bucket? It's because we've already seen that the initial release gave us an acceptable performance. Our users haven't been really complaining much about it. So we are making room for further future feature additions by investing into performance a little bit later. So I can give two breakdowns. So why we decided to delay Windows. One is it had the highest engineering risk. It was doubling the required UI side work, and it had the smallest affected user base. But since Shapr3D is a multi-platform tool, we cannot really delay it further, so it is scoped on V2. We're actually working on it right now. And performance, that one is a huge engineering work. As we are approaching the limits of the renderers and other libraries what we're using, we really have to rethink some parts of the application. Also, we haven't been seeing many complaints from our users during the beta testing. And still, we consider that visualization gives us a fairly good and great user experience. That's why we have scoped it for V3, which will be in the second half of this year. And the last topic what we had to think through is how to maximize our throughput as a team. And to understand this, when you're working on a complex feature, you have several smaller areas, several smaller components what you have to ship. And ideally, in an ideal world, you can parallelize all these components to run at the same time. But we are not living in an ideal world in this sense. So if you have just too many parallel activities, that will stall the team, either by code reviews or just having too many people working on too many things. It's not providing a good velocity. At the same time, if you put too many people on one particular area, it won't scale because you cannot distribute the work well for so many teams, so many people. Maybe there is one component where a single people can work effectively, or another component where two people can work effectively. It's very rare that 4 or 5 people can work very effectively on one single component. So it's very critical to understand what are the dependencies between these components. What we saw in our case is that pairing up is the optimal setup. Of course, this can be different in your projects, in your features. So whenever you are applying this idea in your projects, make sure that you understand the dependencies and understand what is the capacity for a particular tracks, how you can parallelize the work. So as a takeaway, consider creating separate tracks and understand the dependencies within the team. And to ship this feature, finally, we had to break it down into smaller milestones. And what was the reason for that? This project started with enormous amount of risks. We didn't have a final scope. We didn't know how exactly we want to ship, and we didn't know what sort of team we will have. So milestones help you minimizing and reducing risks. especially as the projects you're working on may have both internal and external deadlines. You can act on some internal ones, but it's difficult to act on external ones. So, for example, we had one internal deadline. It was a research demo for some industry specialists who have been visiting the office, so we had to produce something meaningful to them to show. Or we had an external deadline, whereas we had a marketing launch event. So that was, we were about to show this feature to the whole world, to a great audience. So we had to really mindful on how we are breaking down the work, and this we did by identifying the longest feasible work chunk that our team was able to handle with a predictable ship cadence. In our case, this was roughly 1 month, but this might be very different for your team. So just take a look at your team and understand what is the right chunk of work they can handle. And finally, always remember to refine your plans continuously as you're understanding your problem better. We started this project with a lot of volatility, with a lot of questions, and we cut different parts of the scope just to understand and reach to the best value user-looking feature. Here is the actual example of how we were breaking down the milestones of the project. So as you see, that we identified that in our case, roughly 1 month's time was the biggest work, what we could handle predictably. So most of the milestones, what you can see, are 2, 3, but maximum 4 weeks long. There have been a few which have been spanning over 2 months, but in that scenarios, we just simply didn't see any way to break it down into smaller pieces. We had to live with them. Those were exceptions. And the most critical part of the project lifecycle is when you're about to release the project. So what can we do to increase the confidence level of the release? We have been relying very heavily on user feedback. Since this is a very, very visual and very intuitive feature, it's very crucial that our users are going to understand it, they're going to adopt it, and they will use it, they will be able to use it. This is something what you cannot really test with automation, with test automation. Of course, test automation is extremely important, and I'm not suggesting that you should not do it. In fact, you should do a lot of test automation. So the first line of testing was, of course, the team internal testing. This was QA, this was our technical artist, this was the product design. This is where we actually had the feeling internally like, do we believe that we're building the right product? The second was zooming out a little bit, which was in-house testing. It was the CAD experts internally in our team, and we included the CEO. Actually, the CEO of Shapr3D has been a very, very strong voice and contributor in shaping this feature. Then we went out from the company and conducted a lot of user interviews. And finally, we launched a public beta session for visualization. And in fact, we have built the biggest test user pool in Shapr3D so far ever. And as a result, we were able to release the first version in 2022 March, just a couple of months ago, 9 months after the project kickoff. So let's take a look how the marketing launch was. I'd like to show you this video. There was supposed to be sound, but I decided on not singing instead, so don't worry about that. So before I conclude my talk, I would like to summarize the takeaways from these 2 important aspects. So whenever you're building a feature, make sure that you're building the right team. That goes through a lot of aspects, but one of the most important are identify the requirements for the problem and bringing the right talent for solving it. Look for this talent both internally and externally. Some of the talent will be already in your company. Very important, it's not a one-man show. Collaboration is key for a successful project delivery, especially for this scale of feature. And of course, empower and encourage them to step up and take ownership. And second, build the right processes around this team, because processes should serve the team and not limit them. And whenever you're making these processes, make sure that you actively listen to your team. Processes impact your team the most, so if they're vocal, if they come to you with ideas, make sure that you incorporate those ideas and listen to them. And last, feel free to experiment with new ideas and setups. Whatever works, take it. And if they don't work, just throw them away. So that concludes my talk. Thank you, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
All right, thank you very much. A round of applause, please, and we will have questions. So the afternoon audience is very active. Let's start with the one above, because that's the most upvoted question.
It's true.
So let me just read it first, so maybe somebody can't read it. Just a second. So, EM and PM roles often have opposing incentives, which can lead to healthy conflict and ultimately better outcomes. How did you deal without this by yourself?
Yeah, this is really true, and this has been one of the most difficult parts of having the shared role. We are looking at this shared role as a temporary solution in many cases. So sometimes you can do a shared role for a longer time. Sometimes you just do this as a temporary solution. You need to think about, okay, how do I fix the hiring for the team? How can I bring in the right talent? So we are still actively looking for a product manager in the team. But until that, I'm taking this. Yes, they are opposing incentives. And the way I'm relying to overcoming this is having more product input from, for example, the product designer in the team, and having more engineering input from the other engineers in the team. So I'm trying to expand the borders and the responsibilities for the two roles, and thus making me less the bottleneck and the problem in the solution, or in this situation.
All right, thank you very much. We still have time for a couple. So hiring is always a pain point for companies. Do you have some tips for filtering for great engineers in a short time?
Yes, one thing what we have been doing is referathon in the company, and referathon means that several employees sit together in a room. They start looking around their LinkedIn profiles, LinkedIn connections, and they're looking through talent in their connection pool. And this way we were able to build a very huge list of candidates in a very short time. And we actually closed 2 hires out of 3 from this referathon pool. And the third one was already in touch with us for a while. So he came from a different pool. But I think referathon was certainly one very good thing we did. I can really recommend it.
All right. Let's see the next one.
Yeah.
What happens to the V2 and V3 scope work?
We are working on it. So most of the things which I mentioned for V2, they are in progress. Some of them have been already released since March, and some of them will be released in the coming 2 to 3 months. And for the V3, most of those things will be released by the end of this year. So the tricky part was that this very ambitious 6 months original deadline just showed us one thing: it's not reachable. But with the right prioritization, we were able to deliver the right value increments to the users, which resulted in something we wanted to do. We wanted to ship. So it was still a very good way for prioritizing your work.
All right. Maybe we'll have time for all questions. Great. The next one goes like this. How could you guess the time needed to deliver smaller parts of the feature, especially it being in a new domain and having this many people working on it?
One of the things is that many of us were actually not new to the domain. So I have been working on rendering for the last 10 years, so I had some idea on how big effort was to implement some parts. When it comes to UI side and the application side, as I mentioned, we had one of a few oldest employees who actually knew by heart the whole Shapr3D code base. So they were able to give us very good estimations. And I think the most tricky part was figuring out the actual feature, like what will be the user workflow, what will be the content, what we want to do. And that's something what comes from the product designer, who has been actually showing a very big personal growth during this delivery of the project. So to summarize again, actually many of us were experienced in different parts of the domain, and there was very small gaps what we had to overcome. It was most like how you put this together in a very meaningful way.
All right, super active audience. Questions still keep pouring in. Let's do the next one very quickly. Do you think Shapr could replace conventional softwares like AutoCAD or SolidWorks?
I'm hoping for that.
All right. Yes. When will be Shapr3D available on Android?
It is not yet on our roadmap. I cannot disclose more about that.
Okay. Can you give some examples for experimental team processes that stuck around and ones that didn't?
Yes. The ones that didn't stick around was how we work together with our technical artists, because the way engineers work is generally very structured. The way artists work is generally very unstructured. So how do you mix and match the two in a way that at the end you still want to represent the work on our task board? Like we use Jira for tracking our tasks. And we did a few iterations on how to do that, eventually trying having a separate Trello board for that, and the task tracking was extremely difficult. So we actually dropped that idea and came up with a buffer time for one of our engineers who have been in touch with the artists, and we allocated on a weekly cadence some buffer time of random tasks you need to do with our work with the artists. It eventually turned out very good because this helped turning the work together very predictive. So right now we can say we can foresee the coming 1 to 2 months of the collaboration with them and how we are going to schedule that work. So I think that helped a lot. And maybe another example of team process, we have established a weekly cross-functional team sync, which was beside the weekly planning. So the way we generally do features in Shapr3D is through a planning process, which is for engineering, and there is a product design planning process. And what we did instead is putting all these different functions together in a room on a weekly cadence to think and rethink the whole feature and see how can we make this even better? What do we need to skip? What do we need to ditch? What do we need to bring in? What issues we have uncovered during the last month? And we introduced the same kind of reporting in our internal Slack communication. So the whole company was practically able to see our advancements during the previous week, because all the cross-functional team members did a report on what they did. It was maybe just 3 bullets of work, so it's the whole thing fit on 1 page from the whole team. And that works really well. That greatly increased the visibility and transparency of the feature, and that helped because the way I measured the success of this process was how many people come to me asking questions about the progress of the feature. And I see a very steep decline in this. And suddenly people just started reading the reports, and it was really good.
All right. Thank you very much. Definitely today this was a record in terms of answering the numbers of questions. So well done. A round of applause again, please.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.